Hey Ding Dongs, I'm Jamie.
I'm Richard.
And this is Explain It to Jamie, the political comedy podcast in which I, Jamie, a politically innocent but curious fella from Toronto, Canada, have the complicated political happenings of the world explained to me by my very best friend in the world, Richard Lamb.
That's me. Yeah. Friends who closet together. Pause it. I say that not because Jamie and I are closeted homosexuals, but because we're literally in a closet recording this right now.
Yeah, I will say, a nicer closet than usual.
I know. This is a pretty roomy closet, frankly.
Yeah, sound quality's good. You may have noticed. We're back. We're explaining the political happenings of the world. How's it going, Rick?
I'm doing good. I have some fun news from this week. I was elected to the governing council of my professional association.
Hey!
Our professional association, I should say.
That's right. Hook them up on Twitter. Throw out the congrats.
That's right.
Hashtag.
I'm a counselor of the Canadian Actors Equity Association now.
Boom.
Mandate number 1, the only play that is allowed to be performed is Anthony McMahon's adaptation of Animal Farm. That's a law now. I don't make the rules. Oh, wait, I do, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, based on how the political workings of the world have been happening in the last few days, I don't doubt that that's someone's power somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All Les Mis all the time, baby.
Yeah.
That's the new law.
Baby.
I don't make the rules. Oh, wait, I do. No, I don't. It's many people who make the rules. Yeah. I'm very excited and honored, and I take it very seriously, everybody.
Speaking of making the rules, there's a new person in town making the rules down in old Brasilia.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
So we're here today. We did kind of a late in the game topic pivot because I felt that this was like an important topic that we needed to get to while the iron was still hot. And I think a lot of people have this question. So we're here today to talk about
the Brazilian election and Javier Bardem. What's his name?
Jair Bolsonaro.
Jair Bolsonaro.
Javier Bardem is honestly would be a better president of Brazil than this dude's going to be probably.
Yeah, and Jair Bolsonaro.
Yeah. That's the anglicized way to say it. Portuguese uses a lot of sounds that I'm not used to.
Jair Bolsonaro.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you just keep guessing? I'm sure eventually you're going to nail it.
I just try and do an impression of my Brazilian jiu-jitsu teacher every time I do a Brazilian accent.
Nice.
Hey, boom, boom. All right, okay.
I'm sure we're really winning hearts and minds.
We're taking off
among
the
our
air.
Portuguese listeners right now. Okay, so why don't we throw this bad boy into gear and hit this theme song button?
Yeah, push it, buddy. All right, here we are back again after the theme song, ready to learn about Brazil.
All right, so Jamie, do you know anything about Brazil's election? Have you heard of Jair Bolsonaro at all?
No, I have not. I'm taking a pretty active social media break and have been for like a year, and I only go on social media to promote Explain It to Jamie. So,
okay.
So no, I have not. Although I can recommend Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to anybody that is looking for a new, physical activity.
Yeah, great. If you guys want to get swole and dominate your fellow humans, look Jamie up.
Yeah.
He's looking real cut these days, everyone. Something's working.
That's right.
Yeah. Maybe it's the fact that every day he does 300 sprints or the fact that all he eats now is glass and rocks.
Yeah, just have to pretend it's food, guys.
That's the secret. No, okay, so I'm being light because this is going to be a bit of a dark one.
Okay.
I mean, for a change.
Yeah, weather's changing. It's getting colder outside. Everyone's vitamin D levels are at an all-time low.
Right.
Why not smack them right in the gut?
Seasonal affective disorder is just beginning to extend its icy tendrils into our brains, so let's talk about sad politics.
Yeah, who's this Jair fella?
Okay,
Rico?
So Brazil's just had a presidential election, and it's been a huge upset because Brazil, for the past 20 years, basically, has been run by the left, or parties that more or less lean to the left.
Right.
Well, surprise, surprise, there was a big flip, and like many places in the world, Brazil went and elected a dude who is like a hard-talking guy who says the stuff that's really inappropriate, but everyone sort of loves it. Strong man kind of figure.
I've never heard this story.
Yeah,
before.
right. This isn't familiar at all, being played out across
the entire
all of
world.
the entire world at once. But what's making this pretty troubling, Jamie, is that like all of the like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, gross, weird, fascist stuff that has been happening through governments like, the Trump administration, like the Front National in France, which we've talked about, like the shit in like Austria, Germany, Greece. Like, we've mentioned many countries over our episodes that have had this relationship with like a rising far right. This dude is like, he just says the thing you're not supposed to say. He says the loud part quiet and the quiet part loud.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because just this morning I was watching like some Stephen Colbert or something on a Trump thing, he was on the campaign trail last night or something. And he was talking about this caravan of people coming from South America.
The migrant caravan.
The migrant caravan. And he was talking about there's a riot in Mexico and there were rocks thrown and da-da-da-da. And he said, he's like, mark my words, like, when they come to the border, we will treat rocks like firearms, implying that, like, we will shoot. Yeah, we'll shoot them if they throw rocks.
Right.
And I just, like, hearing that was sort of like, oh, that's a politician talking about killing people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's something that I haven't ever heard outside of sort of a recorded memory of some Hitler melodrama or something. You know what I mean?
So people who are familiar with this topic, who are listening to this, will not believe that you aren't very familiar with this topic, because there's literally no more perfect segue than to tell you about what Jair Bolsonaro has actually said.
Okay.
So he's famous he was kind of like a low-level military guy at the end of Brazil's like military dictatorship, which ended in 1985 between the end of the 1980s. It's kind of like a soft ending to it. The military used to run the whole country, and then they transitioned to democracy in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
And he was in the army then. And he's on record as saying things like, the problem with the military dictatorship is the military dictatorship didn't kill 30,000 more people. They wasted too much time torturing people and didn't murder them. He also has said, any policeman who kills 10 people or 20 people should be considered a hero. He said, if I ever get elected, I'm absolutely going to start a dictatorship first day, no question.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and how's he doing on that?
I mean, he's playing he's slow rolling it. He's only been in power for a week as of this recording.
Right.
A week and a half or so, or almost 2 weeks exactly from the day that this will get released. But he's doing the stuff that he said he was going to do so far. I mean, he hasn't yet created a dictatorship, but I mean, he literally said he was gonna.
Right.
There's nothing really stopping him from doing it.
He got elected.
He got elected with quite a strong mandate.
So why, though? Like, if, why? Why?
So, Brazil is a super freaking complicated country, and I had to do sort of, like I said, a late pivot in the game to this one. So I will confess now to our listeners, I did not hit the bottom of Brazil's politics and political history. Right. It's really complicated. There's a lot of stuff in
It's very regional too, right?
It's very regional.
That seemed to be like my big, because we learned about Brazil in like grade 8 or whatever. We had a whole unit on it, and like that in hindsight was sort of an obstacle in my learning about Brazil. Was that my social studies teacher he couldn't speak for all of Brazil. You know what I mean? He could only ever speak about this state or this territory.
That's right.
Or, this segment of rainforest.
And that was one of the major tensions through the middle of the 20th century when the military dictatorship was in power. They were trying to do the stuff a country needs to make it a single country, like link it all together with transit infrastructure and create the things you need to govern effectively from the center. Right. Because Brazil is a sort of fascinating mix of indigenous South American people, Portuguese colonizers who came over, historically through the 20th century. Hey, ding dong, that's a cell phone, and it's going off. And like black former slaves and their descendants who were imported from Africa in a similar way to America's story, right? So it has all of these different ethnic groups, who have, exist in a kind of post-colonial or modern colonial power structure where things are heavily stratified based on class, big time based on race. Race is a huge social factor in Brazil, and heavily based on region as well, as you said. You can't make a direct comparison of racial structure, of racial politics in Brazil to like America. It's not like that simple. Literally every article I read was just like, race in Brazil is complicated. Like that's all it ever said. So there's apparently a lot of factors that determine race, but basically like white people control a lot of stuff and a lot of poor black people suffer a lot of consequences from that. So, one of the major things about Brazilian society, and probably the biggest animating thing in this election, is that Brazil is like crazy violent. It is a violent country.
Yeah, well, a lot of the stories you hear is about like high-profile athletes or high-profile people being, escorted around in like, military caravans and whatever.
So Brazil borders through like three of the biggest cocaine producing countries in the world, and it also consumes a lot of cocaine and crack, and then it's also kind of like an export hub to the rest of the world for drugs. Cocaine.
Step over rubber trees.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Step aside. We're doing that cocaine.
Yeah, what you say bounces off of us and sticks to the international drug trade.
Yeah.
So because of that, there's basically a lot of gang activity fighting over control of where the drugs move, who gets paid for the drugs,
and like
how the drugs do stuff.
Favela is sort of dictated over by like a lord.
Yeah, and favela is the word for like slum or or like region. That's true. It's like very decentralized, like I said. There's just not a lot of state control. Brazil was hit really hard economically recently, so because of that, they had to like do cutbacks on a lot of social services, which means like there's not tons of jobs for poor people, and the gangs become like gangs and crime become like how people survive, the most stable ways that you can make a living in some of these harder regions. And then the response too was because there was fewer resources for like police, they just like militarized them really hard, gave them lots of weapons, and then like radically reduced the the standards for like non-violent confrontation. Essentially, it's like
a war zone all the time.
So like last year, 63,000 people died in homicides in Brazil. 5,400 people were killed by police. 14 people a day get killed by police in Brazil.
God.
There are regions...
What's the population of Brazil?
209 million people.
Holy Jesus.
Brazil has a murder rate of like 30 people per 100,000. And I think like the U.S., obviously a famously gun-crazy country, has a murder rate of like 10 per 100,000. Wow. Out of the 50 most dangerous cities in the world, 19 are in Brazil.
Right.
So it's like crime and security and violence are like a massive day-to-day concern for people there.
I'm also going to say best mixed martial artists in the world come from Brazil.
And those guys are walking around just jiu-jitsuing everybody as like a matter of course, I'm sure. It's like you try to take a banana at the grocery store in front of that dude, and next thing you know, your head is where your butt was.
Exactly. Watching my Muay Thai coach move is like, you're just reminded, you're like, oh yeah, people grew up differently than I did. You know what I mean? Yes. He was kicking from age 2. Yeah. Okay, I would be now, Rick, you are a notorious lefty.
Yes,
fella.
I am.
I would be remiss and I would be shirking my duties if I did not ask. Brazil's in a rough state, and they have, as you said, they've been governed by left-leaning parties for however long. What is the sort of problems they face? Is there any onus on the left government, or is it sort of the drug trade, as you say?
I mean, they just inherited a pretty difficult situation, Right. And a lot of it's kind of unfortunate. Like a lot of the left's measures in the time that they were in office really focused on lifting the poor, like making the poor upwardly mobile, getting the poor resources, getting the poor education, like they created affirmative action universities, so poor, largely black populations and indigenous populations could finally get university educations. They focused on a lot of kind of like social measures like that, and a lot of social acceptance, like more acceptance of homosexuality, transgender things and stuff like that. Now these measures have all become like attack points for the right. This is part of why I think this is such a newsworthy story, is that like all of the familiar shit that we see here in Ontario and in the States is all being used to prop up somebody who's like even worse than Doug Ford and even worse than Donald Trump as a leader.
Well, it feels like, for me, it feels like it's the same, societal impulse. It's just different countries and communities have like more safeguards for that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like I wonder if, if Canada was in less of a developed spot, if we would be facing more of a violent shift to the right versus the sort of, the shoulder check we have right now with Doug Ford. You know what I mean?
And we have a very different relationship to violence in Canada than they do in Brazil. Again, remember,
I guess that's true.
in the 80s, like literally just before we were born, the military ran the country, like joining the army, learning how to use a gun. It was like, like being around violence, being trained for violence was a very different kind of career path in Brazil than it is here. It just maintains such a central place in the society because they ran the country. The general, it's like the army like appointed a general to be the president. It's just a different relationship to it. And then also like the cocaine flow and the gang violence that results of that is very different than anything we have here. But yes, I mean, the left tried to basically give services and things to the poor and to lift the poor out of relative poverty, and succeeded with a certain amount of success or failure for a number of years. Their big downfall was there's just tons of corruption in the Brazilian state. It's kind of wired to be very corrupt, and so the left kind of had to play that game in order to get anything done. And the kind of upper middle class in Brazil and the upper class in Brazil who are not pro-left kind of use that as a wedge to like purge the government of lots of people. Like there was a big anti-corruption investigation into like this major like oil company or something in Brazil that they call the car wash in Portuguese, like whatever they call it in Portuguese. And it's like a kind of investigation. I would almost like compare it to like if the Russia probe in the FBI was just like mowing through Donald Trump's people and people were just like cheering it on and loved it. Like the way that people like loved the Russia probe, people loved this anti-corruption, the car wash, because like all of these kind of politicians who had been getting away or they'd been skimming stuff, or people had, and once the left had been in power for like 20 years, when a government's in power for a really long time, it's easy to blame them for all the problems, even the ones that are really challenging for them to solve. So people were getting, I think like they even started to lose some of the working class people and some of the poorer people just because the crime was so bad, and because the economy had been hit really hard. The left didn't really have the money to invest in services to try to make things better. So this was like a big part of why the left's kind of popularity eroded, along with like social conservatism rising through especially religious groups and religious churches who were preaching more and more that like, homosexuality and transgender rights were non-religious.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, thank you. Sorry for putting your feet to the coals there.
It's okay.
I don't necessarily I also assume like not all right-wing governments are built the same, and not all left-wing governments
is
are
definitely
built the same.
true.
Like I often say to people, I try as best I can not to identify with a political party or like even a leaning, because I tell people I dream of a world in which I can vote conservative.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and that's I mean that in like in a true sense. I would love for us to be so progressive that a person who has liberal points of view and progressive points of view, has to go like, well, okay, like we can't have everything all at once. We need to, but because there's
like
such
not even close to that.
No, you know what I mean. I feel like
that.
no choice. It's no choice at all. You know what I mean? Like I have one way to vote because I can't. I can't vote the other way.
Yeah. So one of the most disturbing things that happened in this election was there was like a lot of repression of the left during the election itself. Kind of like, it seems like there was a lot of business money behind getting the leftists out of power. The most obvious thing that happened was a former president, a guy who was the president from like kind of the mid 2000s through to about 2013 or so. His name is, they call him Lula. He has a super long Portuguese name, but that was his name, Lula.
Right.
It's one of the names in the middle of
yeah,
his long Portuguese name. He was going to run it. He was set to run again, even though he had been kind of like retired for a little bit. But the left was in dire shape, and he's super popular and beloved by people. Mm-hmm. Like, I was trying to think of like an equivalent politician, like just someone who you'd be like, that guy's back. I love that guy. You know what I mean? Like that he had that relationship to a lot of the
like
working class and stuff. Yeah, like this, like someone with the uncontainable, like electric charisma of Ted Cruz. Yeah. Exactly. Anyway, so Lula was all set to run again, and just as he was about to run, they snapped him up in like the car wash with like really, really minor
trumped up charges.
Yeah, it was like on the scale of what had been going down, like they estimate there was like $5 billion of embezzlement. Also, like the car wash was massively disproportionately directed at leftist people and like super ignored right people, even though they were almost certainly all implicated in it together because it's a super corrupt state. It just functions that way. It functions with like private kickbacks and bribery and blah, blah, blah. That's just how the state works.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But the leftists were in power, and so they got the...
Yeah. And the right-wing people use this car wash to kind of get them out of power. Right. And so Lula got sent to jail, and then he got convicted of the crime like right before the election deadline. And once if you're convicted of like a felony in Brazil, you're ineligible to run for office. So they like snapped him up on this very small charge, got him charged with the felony and convicted. And so then like literally like a week or two before he was going to officially run, they like made him ineligible to run. He was their strongest political opponent in the country. It was really shifty. It was like obviously shifty.
Right. So so this car wash happens. Jair Bolsonaro is elected. Who's the group of people that he says they should have killed?
Leftists,
like just people with political points of view that are different.
So this is what started.
Like not even like. I mean, I feel so shitty saying like not even like race based. You know what I mean?
This is the thing.
But at the least you can go like, oh yeah, okay, I get how a horrible.
It's
person
like that. It's like an ideological thing. Like during the election, the police started seizing. They raided a bunch of universities and without warrants in some cases and took all this stuff that they said was like illegal election advertising, including like just like a flag that said like University of Rio anti-fascism. Right. That's supposed to be election advertising against Bolsonaro, or like just pamphlets that were like defend democracy now. Right. Those are election advertising against Bolsonaro.
To be fair, he said he was going to be a dictator.
I mean, it is all out there, right? It's like he didn't fuck around with us. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know what like. Yes, it's very like it's not hidden. They don't like democracy, social justice, and like upward mobility. It's
so wild. I don't, but again, I bring this to like, I can't imagine a scenario in which I would vote for somebody knowing that they intend to be the leader forever. Well, you know what I mean?
You know, lots of people I think are just exhausted with how dangerous Brazil is. Like people, there's this literal saying that people use where they're like, he robs, but he gets things done.
Sure.
Like that's like kind of like where they're at, you know? Yeah. And I think that's where
sort of like the election of Caesar.
That's where a lot of people were at with Trump. They were like, I don't like him, but something's got to be done about blank, you know? Right. And that's where people are at. They're like, I don't like Bolsonaro. I actually hate how crass and terrible he is, but you know, maybe he'll shoot those fucking like the criminals. That's like literally what people say.
Right. And so it's exactly like when Caesar was made Caesar. Like it's like one person is, you know, we're in a state of emergency and a state of chaos. We need one person to unify around. Caesar, here's all your power, and then he never gave you the power back or whatever. At least according to Batman. But
the foremost ancient Roman historian that I think we have these days. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much to talk about with Bolsonaro. Like one of the other things he said that was so bad was like, once he said to another person in the Congress when he was a congressman, she was a woman. He was like, "I wouldn't rape you because you don't deserve it." And he's actually repeated that so many times that they fined him. He's been fined multiple times by the government for like terrible shit he said in Congress. For a long time, he was just that guy in Congress, on the right, that dude on the right, who says all the stupid shit.
Like Rob Ford.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he was kind of like considered like kind of comical and irrelevant and fucking annoying. And what's crazy is that literally 2 years ago, he was still that guy. He was that guy who's like flapping his fucking mouth, who's that, you can't believe that guy's in the government, who votes for that guy? And boom, now he's the fucking president, and he could easily, literally, the military was like, yeah, we'll probably help Bolsonaro do a self-coup where once he's the president, we're just going to help him seize more power. Like, that's where we're at.
Right. Wow. Okay. Is this, what's his end game? As far as you can tell, like we sort of, when we talked about Vladimir Putin, check out episode 1, baby.
Yeah.
But we were talking about he wants, a consolidated Soviet Union effect. Like, he wants all the Russian countries back.
When he was a mere rank and file army guy, his commanding officer said he was a man of excessive financial ambition, lacking logic, rationality, and balance. And definitely, it seems like he's setting himself up to have a very lucrative late political career. He's going for like a lot of big business stuff. He's like fully embracing neoliberalism. And in the past, when he was just like a violent, racist, sexist thug, he was actually still kind of like populist in that like he was really against privatization of things. Like, he believed that people should still own like essential services and infrastructure. He actually was once also fined, I think, for saying that the sitting president should be shot for privatizing something.
Wow.
In the Congress. He said that.
Wow.
Anyway, now that he's actually getting elected, he's done a complete 180. He's hired this guy, Paulo Guedes, who's like a Brazilian University of Chicago trained total neoliberal guy to just control the whole economy. He's like put him in charge of the whole economy. So there's going to be austerity. There's going to be cutting of social spending. There's going to be privatization. Business. A lot of the business people are going to get very rich, and I think that's definitely, he's going to benefit from that, probably massively, and that's definitely part of his plan. He might also be kind of starting a bit of a dynasty because his sons are all in politics as well. They all got elected in this as well.
Right.
Brazilian.
Isn't that funny how that works? Because what's his name? Rob and Doug Ford's nephew.
Yeah.
Just got elected.
Yep.
And I think he got elected last time around too. But last election he did one speaking engagement.
Yeah.
Period.
And they just coast to power.
And they just smoked him. Smoked the other fellow.
Brazilian politics are even more fucked up than that. Like one of Bolsonaro's sons at the time, he was elected to Rio City Council when he was like 17 years old, because Bolsonaro was divorcing that dude's mom, and the mom was a city councilor. So he ran the son against the mom and got her and she lost her seat to her son while he was divorcing her. Isn't that the fucking pettiest thing you've ever heard in your life?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this all seems to be, it's not very ideological. It's all like chest thumping macho bullshit. And so there's no like political project here. There's just like a reign of violence and power grab and money making.
It's my time.
And maybe there's an element of extending that down to his sons and creating an instrument of power that will outlive him. But I don't know that he's thinking that far ahead, to be honest. Certainly there's nothing in his career to indicate that he's a long-term thinker like that, or even like a particularly strong ideologue for any kind of political system.
Right. And so, okay. Well, so moving forward, I mean, it doesn't sound like Brazil necessarily wants a different president. Like, what's the term limit on a president in Brazil? / is there one? I guess.
I guess in theory, there'll be another election in 4 or so years, but will he let that happen? He seems to have said pretty clearly that he won't.
Yeah.
So we'll see what ends up happening. It's kind of funny, like a lot of black people did vote for Bolsonaro. A lot of poor black people voted for Bolsonaro. Again, like I said, there is a religious kind of conservative element to his support base, and there's a security folk, people who feel threatened by gang violence and stuff, they tended to go for him too. He's a strong man. And there's already a term in Portuguese that's like Bolsonaro regret, where like gangs of roving white tough guy Bolsonaro supporters have been like beating up black people, including black Bolsonaro supporters. And so they're already like the Brexit regret, like how the most Googled thing the day after the Brexit was like, what is the Brexit?
Yeah.
I think people are having that moment now with Bolsonaro where they're like, oh, my life might be terrible and none of the things that I'd hoped for might actually be coming true.
Right.
So his like coalition of voters that put him in power was always quite unstable. And so we'll see if it holds together. I sort of doubt that it will, but I also think that things are going to get pretty bad in Brazil. A final horrifying note is that one of the things that he's promised to do all through his campaign is merge the ministries of the environment with the Ministry of Agriculture, specifically because Brazil contains the Amazon, and he wants to like massively loosen the regulations on like how much cutting down and turning into farms of the Amazon is allowed.
Right. So what does merging the two ministries do?
It basically means that
what was managed by one is now managed,
in theory,
by two is now managed by one.
In theory, before you'd have a guy whose job it was to make sure the environment's okay and protected. And then you have another guy whose job it is to make sure the agriculture develops and is in good shape. Right. And those two people can be opposed to each other, right? It's like, you're like, hey, should we log this part of the Amazon or not? And then the Minister of the Environment's like, this is a really bad idea for these reasons. And the Minister of Agriculture's like, but if we do it, it's like a devil angel thing. When you merge them, you create one person with a huge conflict of interest.
Right.
It basically signals that you don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? It's like you're going to protect, it's like you're in charge of protecting the environment and you're in charge of cutting down the environment. It's actually honestly kind of like how Doug Ford merged the Department of Indigenous, Indigenous Affairs Department with the like Mining and Natural Resources Department.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's the same fuck you.
Right.
It just means like,
I don't care.
Yeah, it's like our priority is to steamroll over this.
Right.
And he's literally said that many times. This contains a massive problem though, because if we're about to see a huge uptick in logging and clearing of the Amazon's one of the most important like carbon sinks for the earth.
Yeah, it's like the lungs of
that's what they call
planet.
it.
Yeah.
So if we start losing a lot more of the Amazon than we're already losing, because we are losing 53,000 hectares or something of it a year, and climate change is already accelerating, we have all of these no climate change people like Donald Trump, like Doug Ford, who are in now, who are canceling green energy initiatives and fighting everything that is going to cause a greener planet. And we start losing a ton of the Amazon because now we have like the guy who's supposed to protect the Amazon doesn't give a fuck. He said that completely and has threatened. He basically said Brazil's going to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord unless you let us do whatever we want with the Amazon and let us not consult any indigenous people on what happens to the Amazon.
Right.
Like, it's going to accelerate climate change a lot if we start losing tons of the Amazon, just because we're going to sink less carbon. That's just math.
Right. Oh my God.
Anyway.
Well, great.
Yeah.
I'm glad I know now.
That's where we're at.
Yeah. It's exactly the reason I don't go on social media.
It's going to be a really scary time to be a leftist or a progressive of any kind in Brazil. It's going to be a scary time to be a minority, a racialized person. It's it's going to be violent and pretty terrifying.
Right. And for the unforeseeable future.
And what freaks me out the most about it, I think, is that like all the stuff that happens in our elections here, fake news, like literally, literal fake news, like was a huge part of the Brazilian election. Everyone in Brazil apparently communicates on WhatsApp, that texting app.
Yeah.
And like
that's owned by Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. And there's like groups in WhatsApp. Like everyone has like a group where their whole extended families in WhatsApp, and then a group for all their coworkers. And apparently there was tons of private money going into like basically spreading like memes on WhatsApp that were like scaremongering about the left. And this was what blew my mind. They even had almost exactly the same bullshit about sex education that we had in Ontario, where they were like, they're going to give kindergartners a gay kit to make them gay, which is like something they said here, like there was even like, and the kind of thing that was getting passed around was like a baby bottle where like the sucking part is like a big dick. And it's like, this is what they want to give to your kids.
Right,
it's like,
right.
that's obviously not true, but that's the kind of shit that was like deciding the election among people.
Right.
It was like, everyone's your grandma who just like listens
sees
to
that and
rebel
is freaked
media
out.
and her mind is exploded.
Yeah.
Like those were the people who were kind of making the decision to flip for Bolsonaro, and it was because of all of these lies. So it was kind of creepy that just like the exact same discussions we've been having up here were used to elect somebody who is so violent and so just like blatantly disregarding the norms of democracy. But we have it up here too. Like, Bolsonaro's, one of his sons was like, if the Supreme Court ever blocked anything we ever did, I'd send one army captain and one private, and they'd be able to fucking, kick all their asses and make them do whatever we wanted. But we have the notwithstanding clause up here. Like we had Doug Ford. The court said he wasn't legally allowed to change the size of the Toronto City Council, and he just did it anyway.
Right.
So we already have that here.
Right. Great, man.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the situation we're in.
Wow. Okay.
It's giving me a hard time.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say go. Is there like a is there a website people can go to?
Is there a website people can go to? I don't know that there is a website people can go to. I think it's still really chaotic and really uncertain how everything's going to play out in the long term.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also it's since you said, this is an international thing that is happening all over the world all at once. We have listeners, as we've been, noting, in U.S. and Canada and Britain. We have them all over, and I think just getting involved in your own community government, and making sure that your community knows that you don't approve of anything like this. You know what I mean?
It's just, and like, I mean, more and more we're seeing the effect of like ignorance and kind of misinformation on everything.
Yeah.
You really should just like try to see things clearly. There are lies out there. We're at the point where it's like there's a lot of lies.
Yeah.
People are going to lie to you, and especially the people. I mean, if you're listening to this, you're probably the kind of person who's seeking information on things. So especially like the people you love and your family members and stuff, like people are going to be lying to them and trying to manipulate them into voting for them based on misinformation. We have that here too. Like the other day, the Toronto Sun had this front page story about how like Syrian refugees who are in this hotel in Scarborough
killed
a goat in the bathrooms. It's totally made up, right? It's a lie. It's complete bullshit. But because of that article, someone tried to start an arson, like a fire at that hotel. And the Syrian refugees who are there now are terrified. Right? Like
look at the guy who tried to bomb all the Democrats.
Yeah, the guy who tried to bomb all the Democrats. I don't know. We're seeing more and more like violence that's coming as a result of these lies that are just being made both to like sell papers and control people. And I think that like information is the only way out. I mean, it may be too little too late at this point. It's hard sometimes to talk to these people because they're like kind of conspiracy theorists. They're trained to like, their worldview means that you can like discredit any opposing information as just being part of the conspiracy. You know what I mean? So, we all have to kind of figure out how to do that work. It's the kind of thing where it's like, you don't have to convince 1,000 people if you can kind of like regularly talk to a couple people who you feel like you can get through to. That's probably like going to really contribute to the fight in the long run.
It just feels like such an uphill because like most people are like thinking about, oh man, 5G is going to come out in 2 years.
I know.
You know what I mean? Like that's like the top of a lot of people's, interests.
I think that's still naive though. Like in a few years, like I don't know that we'll have the luxury to worry about things like that.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's where we're at, which is why we're doing this podcast and why we're trying to tell people this stuff now. I feel like we should make a joke about a butt or something. Like I know it's just feeling a little heavy, and not just because we're in a literal closet.
Yeah. Let's see. A butt joke, eh?
Yeah, what do you got? You got anything?
Honestly, no.
Yeah.
I hope you guys get your butts on the internet. I don't know. Okay. Well, this has been a bit of a depressing episode.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
Hey, it's the way of the world, my friend. We are now, guys. We are on YouTube. We are on SoundCloud. We are on the Apple Store, and starting fresh this month, we will be on Patreon. So that is all of your donations will go a long way, and will be all funneled into helping us make this podcast. We really want to grow our podcast and our listenership, and your donations, your sharing, your liking go a long way. You can donate as little as $2 and as many dollars as you would like thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, the Patreon's new for us this week, so I do really want to plug it. I've been paying, we've been paying for the hosting and doing research and making graphics and kind of putting a lot of time into this podcast and literally paying for it for, over a year and almost 2 years now. And I'd love to be able to keep doing it. You know what I mean? It really, your support would really, really immediately make it easier for us to do this, and we'd really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So check us out on Patreon. We have links to it on our SoundCloud, on our Facebook, on everything. And check out our YouTube channel. Jamie, you want to talk about the YouTube channel?
I have spent way more hours than is necessary on developing that YouTube channel. It is right now, it's videoless. It's all just images you'll be able to see, but we are... with hopefully the advancement of our Patreon account, we will be investing in like some cameras and some that sort of thing. Get this thing really up and running, like a real professional job.
Yeah, and I feel like I should just say too, like, we can do it, everybody.
Yes.
Don't get too sad. It's important to get sad and it's important to get pissed off because those feelings mean you're still alive and you're not numb yet, and the part of your soul that wants a good and equitable world still knows how to feel. So hold on to that, feel that, and then let's channel it into like getting out there and hitting the streets and making things better a little bit at a time.
Did you watch Pixar's Inside Out this weekend?
I did. It's like a sort of a Inside Out, Remember the Titans, like mashup pep talk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I believe in us.
I believe in us too. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Jamie.
I'm Richard.
This has been Explain It to Jamie.
Woo!